It is a great honor to be here. Dean, thank you very much for inviting me for this prestigious series. I have to say, when I looked at the people who had given this lecture, it was a little intimidating. And you notice he went, he started at Supreme Court justices and cabinet officials, and then he said, oh yeah, and oh, by the way, some professors. Well, that's what I am. But it's also an honor to be at this university. It is one of the great universities of the world. It's my first opportunity to be here, although I've watched many a game between the hedges on television. So my only regret is that I couldn't quite get here during football season, but maybe you'll invite me back if I do a good enough job. But it's particularly an honor to be introduced by Professor Lonnie Brown. That was an overly over-the-top gracious introduction, although he did slyly put in there that I'm significantly older than he is, generations of law students. You notice those clever lines that he put in there. And I have to say, I am significantly older, and had the honor of knowing Professor Brown before he was a professor, when he was a mere superstar lawyer in Atlanta. And we had a conversation now more than 15 years ago, he reminds me, in which he said, I'm thinking maybe that I might be interested in what you do in teaching. And I had gotten to know him well enough to know that he would be a natural for it. And I tried to encourage him and recommended that he go on the teaching market. But I have to say, he, as successful as I knew he would be, he has succeeded even more than I think I could have ever imagined back then. And so if that's what it takes to be older, then I'm very happy that I am. So thank you. I also want to thank all the students here, although I understand some of you were conscripted by your professors, so I'll try to make it as interesting as possible for you. And I do hope that you do find it interesting, because actually what I'm about to talk about is going to have a big effect, I think, on your careers, whatever those careers are. And particularly for those of you who are interested in practicing law in the private sector, and for those of you maybe who are interested in practicing law in a law firm. Because what I'm going to talk about is how that world is changing. And, I want to start here, right? This is the question that people have been asking themselves really ever since 2008, right? Whether, when the global financial crisis came and the world of law kind of fell off the cliff, did that mean a fundamental paradigm change that was going to change everything about the way in which we think about the legal profession? Or was it more like a cyclical correction, right? I can't tell you, for example, how many conferences I've been to that are called things like the death of big law. Or if that doesn't get you, a friend of mine in the UK wrote a book called The End of Lawyers. His name is Richard Susskind. He always reminds me that there's a question mark at the end of the title, so there's hope for you who are still not graduated. But, that's a pretty dire prediction, right? On the other hand, you should know that there have been recessions and downturns before. In fact, in 1991, as some of us are old enough to remember, when the economy went off the cliff then, the market for law school graduates getting jobs was even worse than it was in 2008, 2009, 2010. So, and yet, by 1993, we were off to one of the biggest booms in the legal services market ever. So there's a real debate here, right? Okay, here's my answer. Drum roll. Who knows? If I knew that, I'd be as smart as the dean. I'd be dean of Georgia or something like that. Look, what do they say? Predictions are difficult, particularly about the future, okay? And you don't know if you're in a paradigm shift when you're in the middle of one, right? 30 years later when somebody writes a book that says that was a paradigm shift. But here's the thing I think we can be sure of. I don't think it's the death of big law, and I certainly don't think it's the end of lawyers. But I don't think it's going to be 2007 anytime again soon. Why? Because I think what the global financial crisis did was just push along or accelerate things that were already happening before 2008, before Lehman Brothers failed, and that aren't going away just because the US economy is booming, which, by the way, it is. And that those things are collectively reshaping the market for legal services in fundamental ways. And you, particularly you young students, you're going to have to adapt to these new changes, because that's going to be your world. What are these changes? You know what they are. Globalization of economic activity and the incredible movement of that activity from the north and the west to the south and the east. Yes, China has slowed down. Yes, Brazil's in a little bit of chaos. On the other hand, India is rising, and Africa, as I will say many times in this lecture, is going to be the fastest growing, most important region in the world in the middle decades of the 21st century. Nobody doubts that the direction of change is towards more and more activity in these emerging markets. Second, the incredible rise in the speed and the sophistication of information technology, Moore's law that says everything doubles every 2 years in computing power. Richard Susskind, the one I told you wrote that book, The End of Lawyers, he came to my class, talked to my students. He's an expert on how technology is reshaping law. And he says by 2050, the average desktop computer, like the one running my PowerPoint right now, will have more computing power than all of humanity combined. Now, I have no clue what that means, okay? But I gotta mean that it's gonna reshape the world in important ways. The last thing is very academic sounding, but I'm an academic, so I get paid to talk this way. The blurring together of traditional categories of organization and knowledge. That's just a fancy way of saying things that we used to think of as being all separate and distinct, you know, are now much more intertwined than they ever were, right? Take public and private. Okay? I don't know, is GM a private company or a public company after the US taxpayers dump billions of dollars to keep it afloat, let alone Petrobras in Brazil or state-owned enterprises in China, you know, or global and local. Or here's one that ought to get your attention, law and business. When Larry Thompson, the distinguished Larry Thompson sitting in the back of the room, and I went to law school, we used to think law was completely separate from business. It was the antithesis of business. You know, I went to endless conferences. Again, I go to endless conferences. You get a theme? And when I first went into teaching, called Law, is it a business or is it a profession? You know, it was probably a dumb question then, but nobody would ask it today because it's so clearly both. It's a very competitive global business, but it's also a certain kind of business that has very distinct and important obligations to the public and professional norms, okay? Get the idea that things we used to think of as being distinct are blurring together. So what difference does that make? Well, I'd say a huge difference in the entire economy. So first, there's been a huge reduction in what the economists would call information asymmetry between buyers and sellers. Again, that's just a fancy way of saying that buyers know way more about what they want, when they want, how they want it, and can take things that the seller used to come all packaged together and force them to unbundle them and to spread them around an increasingly global supply chain. So the easy example for you here is contrast the way in which your parents used to buy music and the way you buy music. We used to go to the record store. Remember that, Larry? You had to go like to a record store, and you could only buy what was in the record store. And you could only buy it the way the record company wanted to sell it to you, which was a beautiful 33 1/3 long-playing LP, beautiful cover art. You probably heard about these things or seen it in some vintage store, and it would have 16 tracks on it. And it would cost, even when I was a kid, $3.50, which is like $50 in today's money. And we would rush down to the record store to buy that album because we wanted what? What do we want? What do we want? Yeah, the one song they were playing on the radio. Okay? Now, to the extent you buy music at all, pause for those of you who teach intellectual property. Okay? You go to iTunes and you pay 99 cents, or that was so 2008, 2000 late. You didn't know, I think I knew that. You know, or now you go to Spotify or Pandora and you put together a playlist of tunes for exactly the occasion you want, you know, working out, ignoring your parents, whatever, and then when you get it exactly what you want, you click your cool little Galaxy S6 phones together. And guess what happened to the music business? It's been decimated by this idea that you can get what you want, when you want, how you want it. Second, when you don't know anything, you have to buy things on the basis of things you can see. And mostly those things you can see are inputs, like the reputation of the producer, their credentials. How many hours did it take to produce? Sound familiar? But the more you know, the less you care about the inputs, and the more you care about the output as measured in value to you. So even those of you, I saw the parking lot around here, many of you have cars. I bet when you buy the car, you didn't ask to see the credentials of the chief designer. You did not ask even whether it was made in America. Nobody even knows what that means anymore, right? And you certainly didn't ask for, you did something about their reputation, but mostly what you did was you drove it. And if that wasn't good enough, you went to Consumer Reports. And if that wasn't good enough, you went to Edmunds.com and you said, what is a cool young person like me, Bulldog fan, lives in the Southeast, drives 50 miles a week, kind of a sporty personality. What kind of car does that person like? And then you read reviews about it. Because what you're trying to do is figure out the output to you. This has been the way we've been buying products increasingly for years. It's going to be the way we buy services as well. Final thing. We still talk about competition as if it were kind of between gladiators in the arena. This company versus that company. The Jets versus the Sharks. Those of you of a certain age will know that reference. But that's actually not the way competition works anymore. So I don't have a cool Galaxy S6, I have an iPhone. And some of you may remember in the last presidential debate, there was a big debate about how come we can't have more great American companies like Apple. Yeah, Apple's an American company. It's got a few thousand people in Cupertino, California. Anybody know where the iPhone is made? Anybody know who makes it? It's not Apple. It's made by a company called Foxconn, which is a Taiwanese company that operates in China. That cool glass screen that was sort of the iconic feature of the iPhone, co-designed by Corning glassware engineers and Apple engineers. And what's the thing that the iPhone still has more of than even the Galaxy? The apps. And does Apple make any apps? A few. Apps are made by bleary-eyed college kids and law school kids like you in lofts in Soho, okay? The Apple iPhone is a network, all right, in which ideas, information, and people cross organizational boundaries to create value. I have a colleague, his name is Yochai Benkler. He's a brilliant guy. He's written a brilliant book, and like most brilliant books, it's impossible to read. So I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. Actually, you could cut that out of the tape. It's a brilliant book. But here's the thing that you need to know about it. The title. And the title is a parody of, not a parody, an homage to a book written by another brilliant academic, which also nobody reads except everybody knows the theme and the title. That's Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. Yochai's book's called The Wealth of Networks. And he brilliantly argues that wealth in the 21st century is going to be created by ideas, information, and people crossing organizational boundaries. Now, if these things are reforming the entire global economy, why wouldn't they touch us? After all, law is a lagging, not a leading indicator of change, meaning we follow economic changes, political changes. I often say that law is the only discipline in the world in which you cannot say anything new until you definitively prove that someone already said it before. That's called precedent. Okay. All right. So obviously, this is going to have big consequences for us because we have increasingly sophisticated clients who are demanding more transparency from lawyers and who are telling lawyers, to take things that they used to have all bundled together like litigation or transactional work and to unbundle those things across an increasingly global supply chain into parts like electronic discovery, motion practice, trial work, appellate work, and then parceling those things out to different providers, which puts pressure on our historic models. So, our business model. Lonnie, you remember this? You know how we made money. You can now reveal the secret. Rate increases and leverage, okay? That's how law firms have made money for hundreds of years, okay? Human capital model. We teach you how to think like a lawyer, and then we roughly throw you in the deep end of the pool and see how many of you could swim by learning how to be a lawyer. Sorry if I'm revealing too many secrets here. And we depend on a kind of an apprenticeship model to make this work. What's our knowledge management model? Well, I passed your beautiful library, which, by the way, that glass thing, I would never study anything. I would just stare out that glass window. Or go ask somebody who knows something, all right? That's the way in which we have transmitted knowledge of the legal profession. And our educational model, except at the University of Georgia, has been mostly to teach people to think like a 18th century common law lawyer, right? Well, those things are all under pressure today. And the proof is that we're seeing what the business school scholar Clayton Christensen calls disruptive innovation in the market for legal services. Meaning, we are seeing new players and new ideas come into the profession. Now, some of that has been very disruptive to existing players, but I just want to pause for a second for all the students in the room and say, this could be your friend too. Because it means that finally there's a lot more innovation coming to law, and you guys are good at innovation. And particularly at the interface between technology and innovation. You've been living it your whole life. Another of my colleagues, his name, actually he's not my colleague anymore, he's now the headmaster at Andover School, but John Palfrey wrote a book called Born Digital, about you, that your generation is born digital. And that has many opportunities in law. And one of the things that's gotten a lot of attention is the interface between artificial intelligence and law. How many people have heard of IBM Watson? Just put your hands up. That's a pretty good number, okay? IBM Watson, which got famous first by beating Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, but then they realized that's not that hard because, you know, chess is a game of limited moves, and once you figure out the first move, if you have a fast enough computer, you could program in every other move that possibly could be made, and it's not only a matter of time before the computer beats every individual human. But then it beat Kent Jennings, the world Jeopardy champion. And it turns out that's hard. Why? Because Jeopardy is an ordinary language. It's not a game of limited moves. You can ask about anything. It's a learning model. And when people saw that its speed is of the essence, and when people saw that it could beat the guy who they had to retire because he'd beaten so many people in a row, people said, well, if you could beat the smartest human in this, then maybe you could help in other ways where there's a huge amount of information which we have to master quickly to develop probable hypotheses to complex questions. IBM Watson is being used extensively in medicine, and it's now increasingly being used in law. I have a whole project on that, but that's not what I'm going to talk to you here about, because there's been another kind of disruptor that's actually been around for a while and what I like to call is hiding in plain sight. And these people are coming very seriously to shake up the law market. I'm talking about what we still foolishly call, for reasons I'll talk about, accounting firms, okay? There has always been a kind of shifting line between law and accounting, right? Always an overlap between the two fields, right? Because accountants audit financial statements, which you need to file your taxes, which means you need to know something about what the law is in order to know how to audit them. And then tax lawyers give legal advice, which has to do something with what the economic prospects and economic foundations of the company are. So there's always been an overlap, right? The balance, which was struck probably 100 years ago now, was that they kind of divided up the world, and that the accountants would do the audits and advise on kind of basic tax issues that every company faces. But the law firms kept for themselves the kind of high-end tax, advice around complex tax transactions. And that's pretty much how it stayed for almost 100 years. And then in the 1990s, the accountants said, we don't like that balance. And they did so for a couple of reasons. One, their core audit business got commodified. You know that word? It just simply means that the profits for doing the audit were declining steadily over time. And companies viewed it not as something extraordinary they had to pay a lot of money for, but where they were willing to drive down the price. And the big five, actually first there were 8, and then they went to 5, competed fiercely in a way that drove down their margins. So they went looking for other businesses to get into, which were at the boundary line of what they already knew how to do, which was auditing. And what they discovered was, yeah, we're doing a lot of law already, right? We're advising people about how to do their audits and how to structure their transactions because of what the tax law is. So why don't we just go into the tax law advising business? And why don't we advise on other areas of law that are adjacent to tax law? Think corporate law, think finance. There's a lot of things that are adjacent to tax law. And they were already moving into the consulting business overall in a very big way. They did this for a while, and then they said, you know what? We could set up legal networks or networks of law firms that we either own or control or are affiliated with us that can provide an even broader range of services and that can advertise themselves as being connected to what were now global organizations. So again, for those of you who don't know, by the 1990s, the accounting firms were already huge, much bigger than any big law firm, and they were all over the world. So they provided a global platform at a time in which the world was beginning to go global, particularly US companies, like the ones Larry has been involved with. PepsiCo, probably one of the biggest global companies in the world, but many companies were beginning to go global. The accounting firms set up affiliated legal networks. And their goal was, as they told the ABA and other regulators, we're just like regular law firms, only bigger. And in fact, they were quite big. By 2001, if you look at this, right, these are the legal networks: Arthur Andersen, Ernst & Young, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, right? These are the big 5 accounting firms. These are their legal networks. And look, Andersen Legal had 2,200 lawyers in 2001. Probably only Baker and McKinsey was bigger then in terms of total number of lawyers. A huge number. And each of them, even Deloitte, the smallest, had 900 lawyers. And more importantly, they were in way more countries. Look, Ernst & Young's in 65 countries. There was no law firm in the world that was in that many countries in 2001. And then they decided, well, the biggest prize is the United States. But the United States had a lot of regulation that made it difficult for accounting firms to go into the business of law. I could talk more about it, but just trust me on this. And so they tried to get the regulations changed. But don't tug on Superman's cape, okay? I don't know if you're a Cam Newton fan or not. The empire strikes back. So the ABA had a commission on multidisciplinary practice. See what the accountants are saying? They're saying, hey, wait a minute. We have accounting services, we have consulting services, we have now legal services, and we can provide a kind of one-stop shopping, and that's what clients want, they said. ABA set up a commission, and actually the commission, much to the surprise of many people, came back and said, you're right, that is what clients want, and we should approve multidisciplinary practice, which at the moment, at that time, was prohibited in the United States because lawyers cannot split fees with non-lawyers. By the way, lawyers are the only people in the world that divide the world into lawyers and non-lawyers as if they are two equal groups. Here's a hint. There are way more of them than there are of us. That's another talk. So they come back with this recommendation, but then people mobilize. And the House of Delegates rejects the recommendation on the ground that mixing legal and particularly accounting services threatens lawyer independence and professionalism. The basic line here is auditors' view are to be responsible to the state and to make their audits transparent and to report problems that they see, and lawyers' responsibilities are to keep confidences and to be primarily obligated to their clients. That was one of the many things that were said by the ABA. And it wasn't clear exactly what was going to happen with that until a little company called Enron exploded. How many people have heard of Enron? Okay, good. So, you know, Enron was, at the time, Larry, the fifth biggest company in the US. It was huge, okay? Grown incredibly rapidly, and it ended up that it was just a Ponzi scheme, right? It was just a fraud. And that the accounting that had that had been given to bless all these transactions was riddled with problems. And that accounting had been done by one of the most, maybe the most important auditing firm of all, Arthur Andersen, which was kind of the gold standard of the big auditing firms and maybe of all professional service firms. But it wasn't just Enron, it was WorldCom, it was Tyco. There was a whole series of these companies which were proven to be far less profitable and built on a kind of house of cards. And people blamed the auditors. They said, it was your job to figure this out. And they said, you know why you didn't figure it out? Well, Arthur Andersen turned out to be selling much more consulting services to Enron than they got paid for audit services. Why? Remember I told you audit had become a commodified business. And so they were using audit almost as a lost leader in order to attract much more lucrative consulting business. And the consultants did not view that they had obligations to be independent in the public trust. They were like all consultants, they wanted to satisfy their clients. That was the story, right? And as a result of that story, we got legislation you probably study in your corporations class, Sarbanes-Oxley, which expressly has limitations on what auditors can do to preserve auditor independence. There's also Peekaboo, which is taking the auditing regulation away from the auditors and giving it to a public regulatory oversight board, and a number of other legislative activities designed exactly to keep the auditors out of these non-audit services. And, as most of you know, Arthur Andersen gets indicted, an amazing thing for a company of its size, and dissolves, basically goes bankrupt, although, as you probably also know, the Supreme Court later on finds that the thing they were indicted on was not a proper charge. But by that time, it's not the Big Five anymore, it's the Big Four. And the result is the Big Four begin to unbundle those big legal networks that I showed you. And pretty much everybody thought they were dead, right? This is from The Economist magazine, very well-respected source. They say accountancy firms' drive in the legal arena is dead. But never forget Mark Twain. Anybody remember what Mark Twain said when shown a report of the fact that he had died in Missouri or Kansas City or someplace? He said, you know, the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. And so we wanted to know whether the reports of the death of the Big Four were greatly exaggerated. And I run an empirical research center called the Center on the Legal Profession, and this is kind of what we do. We try to say, what's really going on in the world? So in collaboration with a wonderful woman from Spain who actually really brought this issue to my attention, because when I said, oh, the accountant firms are dead, she said, well, actually, no, come look at what's happening in Europe. We started to look by tracking their web presence, meaning what did they say about what they were doing in the legal services market in various places in which they portray what they're doing on the web. And we've got a huge paper, which I'm not going to bore you with all of it, but you're welcome to read if you have trouble sleeping. And we have a shorter article in a digital magazine that we've been putting out for a year called The Practice, called The Rise of the Big Four in Law. Websites are fascinating things because what they show you is what companies want to show about themselves and how they want to show it, by how easy it is to find things on their website. I bet you've had this experience yourself. There's a whole field of research about, mostly in the business and marketing worlds, about using websites as a window on how people are portraying themselves. Now, let me be very clear. It doesn't say what they're actually doing, because as you know, people lie all the time on their websites. That's why it is a form of marketing. Having said that, I'm going to say to you that what I'm going to show you about their web presence is confirmed, at least in some ways, by independent objective evidence that we can find. Okay? So now I'm going to show you what they've been doing after everyone said they were dead. So we first looked in 2012, and we looked back between 2012 and 2001, right? And here's what we found. That after unraveling their legal networks, they then busily went and rebuilt them again, only bigger and stronger than they were before, by diversifying the kinds of legal work that they were doing far beyond simple tax advising, which remember was at its core, and the regional coverage beyond Europe, which is where the accountancy networks had traditionally been the strongest. Moreover, they were structuring these practices less as independent legal networks and more as true multidisciplinary practices of the kind that you will remember I just said the ABA tried to reject, and marketing these to global companies as the perfect solution for the problems global companies face in trying to do business around the world. And finally, that slowly they have been increasing the global visibility of what they do. All right, I'm going to show you some empirical data on all three of these things. So, first on expansion and diversification, right? Here's a chart that just shows the number of countries in which through the web, you can find each of the big four offering legal services. And just look at this. Remember how they were in 65 countries, 35 countries? And now they're in 125 jurisdictions, 100 jurisdictions, 80 jurisdictions. Even E&Y is in 26 jurisdictions. Moreover, the difference between the blue and the green is the blue is where they're offering a wider range of legal services which compare to what you would find in the offerings of law firms. So I'm talking things like M&A advising. I'm talking things like project finance. I'm talking things like global FCPA investigations, right? All of these are things that if you went to the website of any big law firm like Alston & Bird, where Lonnie used to work, you will find people who are claiming these are the things that we do. We call these legal territories, or LTs. And what's interesting here is that almost half, and in E&Y's case, although they're not in very many places, the vast majority of places, they're not just doing tax advice anymore. Okay? Second thing, globalization. Look at the markets they're in. Remember I told you Europe, which is in the blue, is still the home base of all the legal networks. And again, E&Y is mostly in Europe, and KPMG is pretty much there. But look at how much expansion they are in, when we say the Asia Pacific, Africa and the Middle East, and the Americas, by which we mean everything but the US. They're not really doing this much in the US at all, but Latin America, they're very prominent. So you can see, for example, PwC, more than half of its operations now are outside of Europe. Okay, just keep getting the sense, right? They were supposed to be dead, all right? Integration. Remember how I said before they were mostly trying to offer legal services through affiliated law firms and networks. Why? Or under their tax law and tax and legal services umbrella. Because that's where they had the most, regulatory comfort. But if you look here, the green is where there's no mention of any independent provider at all. This is a full MDP, meaning what they say is Ernst & Young offers these services, PwC offers these services, and they oftentimes market them as being tightly integrated with their other accounting, consulting, information technology services. Exactly the kind of MDP, in other words, that the ABA had rejected and that, frankly, many other people thought was prohibited. Finally, visibility. So sometimes they made it hard to find. This one's a little bit harder to read here. But this is trying to show you where you can find out the legal services, right? And the global websites are here we go, let me find this here, are the blue. You don't find it much on their global websites. In fact, PwC is the only one that has it on their global websites. Mostly they're on local websites or through separate tax and legal links that then you have to trace out where they are. What's going on here? They're hiding, right? Because they know that what they're doing is questionable, right? And certainly in the US, and they have a huge presence in the US, and so they don't want to be on the global site. But if you know what to look for, you could find it. And particularly in countries where the regulation, as I will suggest, is less robust, they're easier to find. Get the idea? This is why websites are interesting, right? They don't just show you what's there, but how many layers, how many clicks do you have to go through in order to find the thing that you're looking for? Okay, that was 2012. We then went back in 2015, and things had really changed radically. So in 2012, remember I said only PwC featured legal services on their global website? By 2015, they all did. It was all on their global webpage. By 2000 and that they make it very clear that they're offering a wide range of legal services in a broad number of countries. Moreover, many of them had taken whatever remaining independent law firms they had and folded them into the global network to say, we now offer globally integrated multidisciplinary services. And they started hiring top lawyers from law firms. Now, these names may not mean anything to you guys in this room, but these are all big name partners at big firms like Freshfields, King & Wood Mallison, DLA Piper. They were hiring top partners out of these firms, particularly in rapidly growing markets like Asia, Latin America, the Middle East. And they even have started hiring directly out of law schools in many countries, right? So this is something you guys want to pay attention to. And they've started competing for top jobs with top clients. So they are now very well established in things like M&A advising, which is one of the top money-making practices of most large law firms. And they are competing on innovation. So in the recent Financial Times just did an innovation awards, and PwC Legal was the third most innovative law firm in Spain, ahead of many traditional big law firms. And for your purposes, quality of life. These people routinely win Best Place to Work, Working Mothers Magazine, top awards, and they are marketing to lawyers who are in law firms who, let's just say, have been doing less well in these ideas, that this is a better place to work. Okay. And they have gotten even bigger. So This shows you two things. This column shows you how much they grew from 2012 to 2015. Look at this, 21%, 41%, 36%, 200%, 53%. And it also shows you how they're expanding into other regions around the world. Not bad for people who are supposed to be dead, okay? So how did this happen, okay? I'm going to suggest kind of a couple of big things, which I'm just going to touch on briefly. One, there was a lot of gaps in the regulation of auditor independence, much more than people thought. Second, there were big changes in the regulation of the legal profession that many of you may be studying in your classes. Third, the Big Four have changed significantly the way in which they organize themselves to make themselves more attractive to global clients. And fourth is globalization generally and the importance of the market for legal services. So again, very quickly on regulation. Many people thought that SOX prohibited the accounting firms from doing anything other than auditing. That's just not true. Instead, what it did was it provided a list of those non-audit services they couldn't provide to their audit clients. But there was a lot of ambiguity in that list because a lot of the things were tangential or related to consulting or other services that they were already providing, like forensics and investigations. You know what that is? So companies got a scandal, you got to go in, they do accounting to find out where the problems were. But then there's a whole set of legal advice that comes out of how you do those investigations and what the consequences are. The accounting firms have just moved into that area. Or HR consulting. So when you do audits and other accounting, you're trying to figure out what the HR perspective, the human resource perspective looks like. Now they're in the business of consulting with companies about how to do that, which overlaps with what employment law firms do, which have also moved into HR consulting. But the most important thing is they only audit maybe 20 or 30% of the big companies apiece. And so they then just started marketing all these services to their non-audit clients. And this was more true in Europe, where the regulatory gaps were even bigger, and even more true in emerging markets where there was very little regulation at all. So China has very tight regulation on whether foreign lawyers can practice law there, but they actually say nothing about whether Ernst & Young can practice law there, right? Because Ernst & Young says, well, we're not a law firm, so therefore we don't fall under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Justice. Big regulatory gaps. Second, you guys have probably been studying, I hope you have, that the regulation of legal services around the world is changing. In the UK, they have deregulated most of the important kinds of restrictions on how law has been practiced. So, who has heard of an alternative business structure? You should look at, all right, an alternative business structure is a way in which in the UK you can have lawyers and non-lawyers working together to provide legal services. You can have MDPs, in other words, are now legal in the UK. And you've got regulatory oversight, not by the bar, but by a competition ministry under the government. So their whole incentive structure is not to protect the legal profession, it's to provide the best service to consumers. That's what they say. They call it putting consumers first. Not surprisingly, they have allowed much more freedom in how law is practiced, including outside ownership in law firms, public investors even, law firms traded on the stock market. That would never be possible here in the United States. And it's not just the UK. These reforms are being considered in Canada, Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong, even the ABA, in its most recent ethics revision, as Lonnie knows, considered multidisciplinary practice. They rejected it, but it got a lot farther than anybody thought that it would, right? And whatever the local law says, you've got the General Agreement on Trade and Services. Everybody know what that is? That's like, you know, what we used to have just for goods and manufacturing, we now have for services. Guess what's a professional service? Law, okay? And there's a movement globally to take down barriers that are seen as anti-competitive in the market for services. That is making it easier for what the Big Four are doing. And by the way, big law has been pushing for deregulation too. Relaxing rules on conflicts of interest, relaxing rules on the practice in foreign jurisdictions. They have become, as a friend of mine calls them, agents of deregulation. And the Big Four, of course, have been pushing for deregulation too. They've been lobbying at the global and the local levels, and they have been themselves applying to become alternative business structures. And in fact, KPMG and E&Y are already licensed as alternative business structures in the UK to provide multidisciplinary services, including law, and PwC's application is pending. They're also changing how they market themselves. So they used to just want to be law firms. They said, we're just like law firms, only bigger. Remember I said that? Guess what? They don't want to be that anymore. You know what they call themselves? They don't call themselves accounting firms. They don't call themselves even multidisciplinary firms. They call themselves globally integrated business solution providers. And in an increasingly regulated world, guess what's a big part of a globally integrated business solution? Law. But it's only one part. Here's a quote from the head of Deloitte Legal. And actually, this is something for all you students to keep in mind. We think of our clients as having legal problems. They don't have legal problems. I don't care whether it's a divorce or a criminal case or a big company with a global merger. They don't have a legal problem, right, Larry? They have problems, of which law is only one part, and the goal is, particularly if you're in business, but wherever you are, to reduce the legal part to as small a part as possible, right? Here's what he says. He says, the ones thinking that law as such is the most essential thing about our work don't get the point. And they're directly saying, law firms keep talking like you have a legal problem. We know better because we're a globally integrated business solution provider, okay? And that's what global companies ask for. Larry probably beat his hand on the table over and over at Pepsi and says, we want people who understand our business. Accounting firms, we understand it. We're working with you in 15 different ways on your IT solutions, on your audit, on your this, on your, or maybe not your audit. Let's even leave that aside. We understand business, and we can help you solve the problem. And many big law firms have been moving out of what they think of as commoditized or low margin practices, which the Big Four are only happy to move into. And what they say is they don't understand your business, Larry, because of course you have a lot of low margin work. And your big law firms like Alston and Bird and King and Spalding say, oh, we don't do that. The margin's not high enough. But then you don't understand the big stuff, because the big stuff and the little stuff have to be related to each other in some way. We can do more of it. Maybe not all of it, but more of it. That is what they're saying. And this is incredibly important. They already have the biggest IT resources in the world of any professional service firms. You know, way bigger than any law firm. And they say we can use IT solutions and our ability to mobilize IT solutions to help you solve your problem for less, right? I say that we're living in the global age of more for less, and every year the General Counsel's budget gets cut, and every year the General Counsel has to produce the same or better results. So therefore the General Counsel is looking for people who can mobilize various kinds of resources to provide more service for less. This is a very complicated chart. I won't make you read it. It just basically says they used to think of law as ancillary to their business as accountants. Then they wanted it to be a separate business unit. Now they want to change the whole value proposition. This is straight off their website. Global, seamless business solutions. Lawyers working in the Big Four practice play multiple roles simultaneously as a part of the legal service line, an industry group, a particular geographic location, and a number of client teams in which they work with other professionals, tax, consulting, accounting, and financial, to produce value. Now, that's a formidable competitor, okay? And it's only getting more formidable because multinational companies need globalized solutions. So again, if you're PepsiCo and you're in, I don't know, 140, how many countries are there? You're in every country there is, right? 200 companies, over 200, okay? Do you want 200 different solutions to a problem? No. You want as much uniformity as you can get. You know that it's going to be different to do business in China than in Nigeria, but you're looking for consistent service across a global platform. And that's particularly true when you go into troubling or problematic markets where you don't have the rule of law, legal infrastructure that you're used to having, where corruption issues are high. You want somebody who can hold your hand and provide you with know-how and know-who in those jurisdictions, right? And that's precisely where the Big Four are investing. Here's what E&Y said in 2011. We're investing $1.5 billion, mostly in emerging markets in the next 4 years, and we expect to maintain that investment level for the next foreseeable future. I was just at a major global law firm yesterday talking to their new partners, and their whole revenue for the year was $1.5 billion, right? This is an order of magnitude bigger. E&Y and PwC are doubling their headcounts in legal in places like Asia and Pacific, and they all have a far greater presence in Africa than any law firm. And Africa is going to be the most important place in the 21st century. If you don't remember anything else about this, Africa has 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world. It's not just extractive industries. It has the fastest growing middle class, the fastest growing cell phone markets. Yes, there are problems, but that is where every company in the world is looking, and they're already there. They're in every important African market with sizable and significant presence. So, what's going to happen in the future? Well, I don't think they're going anywhere, right? Look, the global legal services market is estimated, and I think this is low, $660 billion, which is 3 times the size of the audit market. It's a big prize. Moreover, it's highly fragmented. If you look at the top 100 law firms in America, like the AmLaw 100, globally, they only have less than 13% of that entire market. You know, if any one of the Big Four could get 1% of that market, they would instantly become the largest and most important legal services provider in the world. But they're not stopping with law. This is the most interesting thing we found. In 2014, PwC and Google for Work got together, and they say, the head of PwC said, we bring in the content, they bring in the technology. E&Y and LinkedIn, designed to help companies develop deeper and more trusted customer relationships through the use of social and data analytics. Okay, remember what I said about technology, about IBM Watson? They're already moving on this front with the biggest technology partners in the world. They have the possibility of being far more disruptive than most of the things that are expressly aimed at law. Okay, so what does this all mean? In 2002, a friend of mine named Robert Rosen wrote a great article called "We're All Consultants Now," in which he argued that what was happening to the legal profession, both outside lawyers and internal counsel, was that more and more the objective was to integrate law into cross-functional, multidisciplinary teams to achieve business objectives. If we look at what's happened since Rosen has written, and I wrote an article in 2010 about this, but I think it's even accelerated since then, this is what we're seeing in the whole global economy. Remember how I started, right? Unbundling across global supply chains, the moves from input to output-based measures of quality, the creation of networks of value. All of these things are accentuating the need, particularly for big businesses, for these cross-functional multidisciplinary teams. And all of these reinforce the competitive advantage of the Big Four, right? And law firms, if you go to their websites, they say we provide business solutions. In fact, the websites of global law firms are looking more and more like the websites of the Big Four. only going to reinforce this trend. Now look, I could keep you for another hour and say, is this a good thing or not? You know, what does this mean for things like professionalism, client service, public policy objectives? I think these are really interesting and important questions. But for now, I guess I just want to say, we should pay attention to what they are doing, okay? And what the increasing success of their model says about the future of global services, which of course is why I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions, and it could be about this or anything on the outskirts of this, or yes, please, thank you. This very nice young lady in the second row asked, did I think whether law firms and consulting and accounting firms were the law firms were gonna become more and more like the Big Four and they were gonna compete directly? I think that is one future for one, certainly for one kind of law firm. And let me be clear about this, because I didn't really, so the talk I gave was targeted mostly around kind of the big global companies and the competition for those. And I do think that you're going to increasingly see the big global law firms in direct competition with the Big Four on a variety of services. And in fact, as I said to you, I was just with 50 or 60 new partners at a very, very big global law firm, which was having its big partner retreat in Miami yesterday. And when you talk to people outside of the United States, they all say, oh, we're already competing with them all the time. But here's an even, I don't know whether it's scarier or more a broader point. So the biggest part of the legal services market that that is in need of being disrupted is the market for individuals and small businesses, right? I mean, if you ask who's the most underserved, it's not PepsiCo. Larry's left, so I can make fun of PepsiCo now. No, I won't do that. It's not the big companies. You know, they've got their issues. It's too expensive, whatever. But it's ordinary people. I mean, look, I'll tell you guys, here's one hard truth. No matter how successful you are when you get out of here, it'll be a long time before you can afford yourself when you have a legal problem, right? Meaning that, you know, lawyers are expensive, you know, and lots of people go without. So one of the interesting questions is whether the Big Four will take some of what they're learning, particularly about how to mass produce things, and to do, essentially, will we get TurboTax for lawyers? I mean, if you think about LegalZoom, right? LegalZoom, all of you know LegalZoom, right? You could not know it. It's on cover TV all the time. Do you know that LegalZoom is the most recognized legal brand in the world? And it's not a law firm. Technically, it does not practice law, okay? It can't, because it's owned by a bunch of private equity investors who are looking to cash out in a big way one day. But they are providing probably more legal advice and more legal services, and basically what they're trying to do is leverage technology, do it yourself. I mean, again, think TurboTax. I don't know how many of you used it. You used to have to go to an accountant, right? I don't know how many of you saw this. I look at this stuff obsessively. I have no life, so you shouldn't, you know, you don't need to see all the things I see. Goldman Sachs. Okay, we think of Goldman Sachs as being only, you know, big, giant corporate finance deals, whatever. You either think they're the great savior of capitalism or the devil, whatever you think. You think that, you don't think they have anything to do with individuals. Guess what Goldman Sachs is going into? The home mortgage market. The home mortgage market, not bundling. They went in the home mortgage market before and almost destroyed the economy. No, I'm talking selling home mortgages. Because what they do is they figured out, well, we know how to do this, we know how this thing works, and we have the technology and we have the resources to put in it, right? I think these things with Google and with LinkedIn, and you can imagine with who's going to link up with Facebook, right? You've already got companies that are lawyers who are marketing through things like Facebook. How many people know what Avvo is? Have you seen those commercials? They're really annoying, aren't they? But Avvo, so Avvo is a basically think Uber for lawyers. So it's kind of a network matching service between lawyers who have excess capacity and clients who want lawyers, and it's a matching thing, and there's a bidding process, and there's a rating process, so it's also a little like Yelp for lawyers. I mean, all of these things, right, in the kind of new economy are gonna come to the market for legal services, and these guys, the big four, are actually sort of well positioned, if they want, to try to expand their capacities into that market, at least for things they think they can mass produce. So the bottom line is, yes, I think there's going to be a lot more direct competition in this space as all of these boundaries get blurred, the point I tried to make earlier. I hope that's helpful. Yeah, please. This question was, well, isn't the last safe place the management of high-end litigation, where lawyers have to go to court? And so the first thing is to note the irony of this, which I think, so one, I think you're right, but note the irony of it. Lawyers, for the last 100 years, have been trying to move beyond the courtroom. Right? 100 years ago, to be a lawyer meant to be a litigator, to be standing up in front of these judges or the jury room, to be a great orator. That's what lawyers did. And the genius of the Cravath model in, Paul Cravath and the Cravath firm in the turn not of the last century, but the century before last, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was to create the role of the business lawyer. And the business lawyer doesn't go to court. And the business lawyer advises clients on transactions, right? And does deals. But here's always been the problem. Why do you need a law degree to do that, actually? That is, what's the competitive, what is the actual justification? George Triantis, a wonderful guy, taught with me for a couple of years at Harvard, then he went back to Stanford. I don't know why you would like the weather better there, but no, it's a great law school. And I gave this talk, not this talk, but a talk several years ago about the future of the legal profession. And, he said, maybe what is going to happen to laws is just going to retreat back into litigation where the monopoly is the most justified and the most protected, right? It's the most justified because we do train people to be courtroom advocates, and that's where analysis of legal decisions and legal precedents and all the things you guys are studying is the most directly relevant. But then the rest will be totally opened up for competition. That's one possible future. Now you say, okay, well, at least we have that. We'll always have Paris, but how about legal process outsourcing? So how many people know what an LPO is, or a legal process outsourcing? Put up your hands. All right, this is something you guys should look into, okay? Legal process outsourcing sort of started as an outgrowth of business process outsourcing. So many of you know, look, it's been in all the debates, that many jobs have been lost overseas, in the US have been lost overseas. Why? Because companies have shipped a lot of their back office services out to lower wage jurisdictions outside of the United States. India being one that profited enormously from that. India developed these big firms that did things like back office accounting, payroll, call centers, all the things that you know and love and maybe hate when you're trying to get an answer to some question. And then they realized, well, we could do that for law too. So how about discovery? Well, there's no reason why you have to pay a University of Georgia law student whatever number of hours, even if you're only paying them a mere $100 an hour to read documents, when you could get a lawyer in India to do it for $20 an hour or $15 an hour. Or how about basic drafting interrogatories in standard cases, or answering motion practice. So now there's a whole group of companies in India that do this kind of work, and guess what? They're not in India anymore. Infosys is in the US, hiring JD graduates to work in legal process outsourcing organizations. Now, those organizations are not law firms. These are companies, right? With outside investor capital. The question is how far up the value chain they can go. Will they ever appear in court? Probably not, but would they write the brief? Maybe IBM Watson will write the brief, okay? If you watch those obnoxious commercials with Bob Dylan and all that stuff that IBM Watson is doing, they're writing cookbooks, they're doing medical research, they're doing a whole bunch of stuff, right? The founder of artificial intelligence just died. I'm blanking on his name, the guy who was at MIT for many years. Google him, fascinating guy. All of you are living in his world, okay? And the prospects, if you take Moore's law and you just say that the capacity is going to double every 2 years, what is going to be possible to be able to be done? I'll just give you one more thing, and again, you can tell I don't have enough of life, and this is all I want to talk about, but they now have online artificial intelligence dispute resolution. So eBay, you have an eBay dispute? You have to go through many levels of dispute processing before you get a human being, right? There are lots and lots of systems, Wikipedia, that are now being developed outside of courts to handle disputes. And of course, the biggest is arbitration. And you may have a lawyer if you're in an arbitration, but you don't have to. And international arbitration is taking up many of the biggest disputes. Most of these people are lawyers, but again, why? Not necessarily clear that there might be a separate training track. So the world is changing dramatically on these fronts, and I'd say, it's going to be a kind of a battle as the boundary lines between these various kinds of professional services blur. But I'll leave you with this. It's a scary time out there, I get it, okay? And it's a scary time, not just in law, but maybe particularly in law. There's a lot of press around it. But it's also a time of great opportunity, right? It's also a time in which you can more and more find your own way. If you have an idea, don't shy away from it. If you think there's a better way to do something, if there's a way to combine what you've learned in law school with maybe what you did as an undergraduate or what your hobby is, that's the way in which this world is going to change. And you don't have to do it for everybody. You just have to find a niche that works for you. And don't settle for anything less. You're getting a fantastic education here. You are really bright people. Otherwise, you would never have been here in the first place. Where there is change, there's also opportunity. And as Rahm Emanuel used to like to say in the early days of the Obama administration, never let a good crisis go to waste. Although he's now got a crisis, I think he wishes he could go to waste. Anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you.